What's up, guys? Sam here from the Timeline, and we are back into the swing of things for the 2021-2022 season. It is officially starting to feel real. I'm looking forward to ramping back up coverage on this channel of Suns games and news, but before we cover anything that's going on in preseason, I wanted to take my final opportunity to address some of my feelings on the Suns offseason as a whole. Regular podcast listeners may have heard me talk about some of this stuff before, but in the spirit of full transparency, I wanted to get it all out there on this platform. But before I do any of that, I have a super important announcement regarding our content, so listen up. The Timeline now officially has a Patreon for the first time. Off the bat, I want to be very clear in stressing that nothing is going to change regarding our YouTube content or our weekly podcast for those of you who are regular listeners. But the truth is that in our over 3 years of doing this, we've never been able to monetize any of our content on YouTube due to the fact that we use copyright-owned footage from the NBA. Many people have approached us during that period asking what they can do to financially support, and while it's totally optional, you now have a way to do that. Those who subscribe at the $6 tier and above will get access to weekly bonus podcasts made for patrons only, where we plan on doing plenty of exclusive mailbags, AMAs, and other special segments. I'll drop a link in the description below, or you can just go to patreon.com/thetimeline to sign up. And for anyone who does toss us a few bucks, I just want to give you a very sincere thank you. Your support to this channel and to our pod is never taken for granted, and we consider ourselves insanely lucky to even be in this position in the first place. And oh yeah, we're also raffling off a brand new, never worn Warren Lotus The Final Shot t-shirt to one random person who signs up for the Patreon before October 13th. We'll be announcing the winner of that next week. Okay, back to talking Suns basketball. At first, I thought I was going to do this video with actual concrete grades, but that felt a little rigid, so to be honest, I'm just going to speak generally on how I feel. A state of the roster address before we really kick things off, if you will. We begin with what was the biggest priority of the offseason by far, and that's the re-signing of Chris Paul to a 4-year, partially guaranteed $120 million contract. While some people might just look at Paul's age and find that money figure frightening, this was an absolute no-brainer for the Suns to bring back a guy who was phenomenal both in the regular season and the playoffs. Remember, Chris Paul gave us 20 points and 8.5 assists per game in the playoffs on 58% true shooting. Even if it didn't end like we hoped, he routinely demolished opposing defenses with his mid-range jumper. When you toss in the fact that only $75 million of this deal is actually guaranteed, it's an easy steal. The biggest steal, however, obviously goes to the deal that they somehow got Cam Payne to agree to, at a total of $19 million spread over 3 years. I was prepared for the distant possibility this summer that the Suns could have lost Cam Payne, but I am so relieved that he's back to take up six-man duties again. In terms of new additions, there are really only two guys who I anticipate playing pivotal roles in the rotation. Both JaVale McGee and Landry Shamet are role players, but they are role players aligned with a common vision of James Jones's overall framework. McGee, in addition to his championship pedigree, brings much-needed interior defense and rebounding that the Suns lacked in the playoffs whenever Ayton went to the bench. And Shamet, being a verified sharpshooter, injects even more motion into the Suns' offense. Personally, I have some questions about whether forfeiting a first-round pick and Javon Carter was the right value in that trade, I'll be honest. But at the end of the day, I do believe Landry Shamet is an upgrade, and I do believe he's going to make a lot of threes with the Suns. While all of these were net positive moves, I couldn't help but feel that there was still something missing in the team's offseason, and you only have to look around at the rest of the Western Conference to see why. The biggest addition that any other Western team made was obviously the Westbrook acquisition, which I think most see as a desperation heave for the Lakers. It may pay off. After all, Westbrook is an incredibly talented player, but there are 1,000,001 reasons to question the fit, which makes this Lakers team lack the intimidation factor of a contender like, say, the healthy Nets, in my opinion. And after Westbrook, who even did anything? I'm talking stuff like Jeff Green to the Nuggets, Rudy Gay to the Jazz, Larry Nance to the Blazers. These are all solid players, but hardly anyone swung for the fences in the West. So back to the Suns, I think it's important to stress that they also left resources on the table this summer. As a non-luxury tax-paying team, the Suns had access to a full mid-level exception worth close to $10 million per season, and they used only just over half of that on JaVale McGee, with the rest of that money seemingly vanishing into thin air. They also had access to other exceptions, such as the biannual exception, which allows for a team to fill out its roster with a role player worth substantially more than your basic veteran minimum contract. But again, the Suns opted not to use it for reasons unknown to us. with that context, maybe you can start to imagine the source of some of my frustration about the Suns this offseason. In a year where virtually nobody else was bold enough to be creative, and the Suns were just in the finals knocking on the door to a championship, they should have found more creative ways to capitalize on that momentum and go all in. That doesn't necessarily mean a blockbuster trade, but it at least means using all of the resources that the NBA guarantees to you. The fact that they didn't do that, I have no choice but to be a little bit disappointed. And to be clear, in my mind, the Suns enter this season once again as a top 2 seed in their conference. Given a full slate of health, they will compete for a championship. But when you're as invested into a team as we are, it's hard not to think of ways that things could have gone even better. A Thad Young trade, for instance, would still be awesome if they could somehow pull it off. One last thing today before I leave you, I believe any news coming out right now regarding DeAndre Ayton or Mikal Bridges extensions for the next couple weeks to be posturing. And frankly, I'm not really looking into it all that much, but believe me, we would feel a lot better if Sarver would just get it done and lock up both guys long term. That's going to be all for me today, guys. Again, if you're looking for a new way to support us, hit up patreon.com/thetimeline and subscribe to one of our tiers. The names you see here are people who have already signed up and will have access to our bonus pods, so thank you again to them. Also, hit me with a vibe check in the comments on how you feel about the state of the Suns roster, the ensuing extensions, all of it. We're ramping back up now, so expect plenty of content to come. Peace out, and go Suns.